And we have the Scottish Rite's a third. That's the one that's, that is the Scottish Rite. And that's what, Catholic and Anglican and I don't know if there's any Orthodox use it, but that's really common. Lutherans use it, which is really odd, but that's because it's English. Scottish Rite's English. And then this newer one is the newest one. And you notice how easy it is to sing? It's because it's normative. But anyway, history changes. I got a whole bunch of pages because of the references.
I'm not in control.
You're not in control? What?
No, I'm not control.
Oh. All right. The words of the day. These are I chose you some really interesting words. You haven't noticed Hebrews is full of interesting words. So E-P-E-T-U-K-O-N. This is epitukano. Epitukano. And what's really interesting about this word, and I even put it into the word tukano is to hit or light upon as a mark to be reached. Well, what word does that remind? What definition does that remind you of? No, how about harmantia? Harmantia is miss the mark. Tukano is to hit the mark. I think that's really interesting, right? Because we hear a lot about harmantia, and of course the Greeks were into this harmantia because harmantia is like, okay, I missed the mark. I didn't meet my goals in life or sin or whatever, right? And we've talked about this because I think it's really the difference between harmantia in a Greek sense and what we think of as sin and what the Hebrews thought of as sin. Okay, sin is only, according to Hebrew, the breaking of the commandments. The 10 word, but remember the 10 word isn't just the 10 word. The 10 words are the synopsis of the law. So it's the breaking of the law that's important. And to know what the breaking of the law is, you have to go into the whole Torah. You just can't say it's the 10 Commandments. But the 10 Commandments is a great start because it's the synopsis of the law. Well, the Greek worldview and the worldview of the New Testament isn't just about you sinning. It isn't about you just breaking God's law. It's about you not reaching the purpose that God had for you, which is what we know is the point, right? When God says, here's my law, that's like the bottom line. You got to reach this mark, and we know no one does. But then there is another mark that God says, well, I made you for this purpose. Where have I heard this before? There is actually, I think, Young Life or a few others, they say you were made for this purpose. Well, you are. That's the New Testament, okay? Classical theology, you were made for a purpose. What is your purpose? We know you're a sinner. We're all sinners, right? And Christ has redeemed us. But what are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do about it? You don't go sitting in we've had that example. Don't go to the epi-synagogue and just sit there. So epitukano means to chance upon. Tukano means, epi means, let's see, specifically, through. I didn't leave that. The specific definition. Superposition of time, place, or order. Through. And tukano means to hit or light upon a mark as to be reached. So that's the opposite of harmantia. Through, and so this means specifically to chance upon. To chance upon. So this is the mark you want to hit. So in other words, this is a mark that I hit without even trying.
Serendipity.
Yeah, it actually means serendipity in one of its meanings, and I didn't include every single meaning. I think I have some of these in here. No, I didn't put every single one. But in different, dative and accusative cases, it means different things. In serendipity, we would say that, but the Greeks probably never believed in serendipity. Why? They believed in fate, right? Fate. Everything's fated. And you're not going to get away from that in the Greek worldview. So you chanced upon it even though you didn't. Okay, so, the first time you go out and you roll a bowling ball and you hit a strike, right? Epi tukanu. You really didn't know what you were doing, but you did it anyway. Or you had a blindfold on, you're shooting a bow and arrow, and you hit the mark. Oh boy. Epi tukanu, you chanced upon. Here's another one. I thought this was a really fun word. P-A-R-E-M. B-O-L-A-S. Per-im-bolus. Para is near. M is in, is the in sound that makes in or into. And bolus is to throw. To throw. Now, we know parabolo, right? That's near throw, which is parable, which is a parabola, right? Near throw. So I thought it was really interesting. Parimbola, which means literally a throwing beside. A throwing beside. But it doesn't have a geometric context the way parabola does. It's a word that has to do with warfare. It's specifically, if you notice, it says specifically a battle array, an encampment or barracks, the Tower of Antonia. Now, I don't remember anywhere in the Gospels, maybe we just haven't got to that point where it calls it a parambola. But a parambola is literally, army encampment or a battle array. Very different than parabola, right? Or the geometric constructs that we're kind of used to. So, I think I've noted before, have you noticed in Hebrews there's a lot of military words used? And if you remember back in Matthew, when we looked at Matthew, there were a lot of military. Remember the word actio? Actio was used so many times, it blew me away. It's a Latin word meaning the second in command of a legion. Why would the writers use those words unless, it was really familiar to them and to their audience? And like I said, I don't find it unusual that we see really strong Greek military words encased within Hebrews because of the audience. And I want to reiterate, we know for a fact that whatever the reason, because Christianity looked like a mysterion, because Teen Hodos looked like a mysterion, and the Roman legions were so far into the Mithrin mysterion, and if you remember, Christianity, if you want to say it this way, first infiltrated the Mithrin mysterion, because we know this because the churches were underground, because of the verbiage used a lot in all the New Testament, and because of the verbiage we have, remnants of it, right? The catacombs. The Mithranism looks a lot like Teen Hodos in some ways. And for the Roman legions were really into Mithras, Mithrin Mysterion. But what happened is, we know in the 2nd century especially, that the Mithrin Mysterion began, the Teen Hodos began to supersede or become one with the Mithrin Mysterion in the Roman legions, to the point that the Roman legions, because of Christianity, as a matter of fact, I will put this to you. I haven't heard it before, but I will say that this is probably one of the things that's caused Constantine to accept Christianity, because his legions were becoming Christian, and he couldn't control them anymore. We know this because you guys have heard of this, the 40 soldiers, right? The 40 legionnaires.
40 brave soldiers.
Yeah, there's even a song, the 40 brave soldiers. You go look it up. The 40 legionnaires, this was a classic. that when the I don't remember which emperor it was, one of the emperors asked the legions, asked all the people to do a grain offering to Zeus, I believe. It was a grain offering to Jupiter, to the emperor. They gave a grain offering to the emperor. And a lot of the legionnaires would rather die than do the grain offering to the emperor, because they were teen hodos and did not acknowledge a God outside of Christ, outside of Jehovah. And we know this was fomenting and building in the Roman Empire, which may have led, well, Constantine all of a sudden, Constantine just out of the blue goes, I'm a Christian, everything's cool, Christianity is now the religion of the Roman Empire, let's go for it, dudes. Right? I mean, if you've read the accounts, it's almost like overnight, he just basically, and some think it was because it was a Parthian excursion he did where he lost almost the whole legion. Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff that was going on, political, military, and we're not studying that period, we're back in the Hebrews period. So let's go look at Hebrews. We are in verse 33, and we had already parsed it, so I'll go back to the translation. 33. So the literal was, who through persuasion struggled against royalty, toiled equity, chanced upon the message of the gods, the gospel, euangelion, fenced lions' mouths. And so a translation of this is, who through persuasion struggled against royalty, toiled equity, chanced upon the gospel, and fenced lions' mouths. Now, they're Greeks. So what do we know about this verse?
Literal.
It's literal, so it applies to specific people, right? And so the cool thing is go find the specific people, and I gave you all the, and I've got them all here. That's why I got 52 pages worth for the next few verses, because everyone is full of these. So you got, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Daniel. I mean, this is full of stuff, and we can guess some of them, right? Stop the mouths of lions. There's a couple of people that did that. Daniel and Samson. David toiled for equity, righteousness. He didn't achieve it. Remember, you can't toil for it. That's a Greek irony. You can't toil for righteousness, because righteousness means, remember, diakosune is balancing on a ball. So if you're toiling for it, you're not balanced, right? You're not balanced if you're toiling for it. If you're working, if you're striving, you can't be balanced. It's got to come. It's like on a ball. If you go too far left or too far to the right or too far forward, you're going to fall off. So, and we know there's acrobats, and if you try it, right? Well, try it and see if you don't believe me. For example, there's that game they used to do, right? Rolling on you had a can or something, and you rolled on a plank. But that's only in
One dimension.
Yeah, one dimension. Now try it in all three, right? When you're trying to be on top of a ball. This is why the Greeks use that image. And remember, I told you, we put the god of equity, the god of diakosune is Mercury. Who is it in? Is that right? Yeah, Mercury in Greek it would be Hermes. We put him on top of a ball, on top of the earth, but it's not the earth. If you go look at the original drawings, the original sculptures, it's always on top of a ball. They did not perceive the earth as round in that period. They didn't draw. You should be able to tell when you see the American continent. Right? The American continent. No one knew what America was or even was there until 1492, and even then they only knew the coastline. So anytime you see something that says it's a Greek Mercury or Hermes on the world, and the world has the the United States and Central and South America, it can't be ancient Greek. Just saying. I mean, they weren't like alien invaders. So, I'm just saying, but you see this all the time, right? And everyone thinks, I mean, our kids probably think, you know, the way they teach them in school, that that was an original Greek or Roman or whatever statue. It's not. So, let's look and see. Here's those who struggle against royalty, toiled equity, and chanced upon the messages of the gods, which is interesting that it says chanced upon the gospel. And the word chanced, if you remember, I think that's, yeah, epitukano. Epitukano. So do you get it? Even if they weren't looking for it, they hit the mark, right? They hit the mark accidentally. This is interesting. And I want to also reiterate, if you remember in our string of pistis, the pistis string, who was the peak? It would be on a test if I had a test for this class. Rahab. Rahab, who was, and you know, the fact that she was a prostitute is not important. I mean, it's important with the context of the culture, but it's not important that she was, okay, the reason I say that, okay, in the Greek worldview, if you were a prostitute, what did the Greeks think?
It wasn't really a bad thing, was it? It wasn't like serving the gods somehow?
Well, it wasn't serving the gods, but a person who was a prostitute, we think of prostitution, and I'm not trying to change your view on prostitution. Prostitution is not a positive thing, okay? But the Greek worldview of prostitution was that if you needed one, you hired one. Male, female, I mean, okay, it's total secularized kind of libertarian view that some people in this country are trying to push, right? It's not a good Christian virtue, but it was, they were independent people that were merchants. Merchants were middle class, right? You have the wealthy. Matter of fact, all the dhimmis, okay, Greece. This is Greek stuff that your Western Civ classes don't cover, but they should. All the dhimmis were poor, wealthy, middle class. Which one? The dhimmis are the different family groups in Athens. They're all wealthy. They're all free. They're free and wealthy. And these were the people that were chosen by lots from the dhimmis. Every dhimmi chose by lots 2 representatives for the Athenian ecclesia, the Athenian democracy. They were chosen by lots in the dhimmis. They weren't voted. In the ecclesia of Athens, they did vote. They were a democracy. They were representatives chosen by lot. The Founding Fathers decided that in America we should choose our representatives by votes. But we are a representative government. The dhimmis, the Roman ecclesia, or the Athenian ecclesia, the Athenian democracy, they were chosen by lots from the dhimmis, and they were the wealthy, free people. Now, between the dhimmis and the slaves were about maybe 80% of the Greek and Roman cities. Okay? They're huge, mostly female. They didn't want males. They had males, but the males were usually put in hard labor because females were much more easy to control and docile. They did not want male slaves because you don't want slave revolts, right? You don't want to have to handle it. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't you say that the scribes were slaves? And they were obviously educated slaves.
Not the slaves, not the scribes. The scroll slaves or book slaves. The book slaves were slaves. They were sold with the books. And I've been doing some research lately. Do you know how much, did I say this last week? Do you know how much a Torah costs? Yeah, $55,000. and a book slave would be 10 to 20,000. So that means your total cost in that era of buying a book or a scroll, 70,000 bucks, easy, 60, 70,000 bucks. So there were slaves, and there were, in the slaves, you had different types of slaves, right? You had obviously household slaves and domestic slaves and these slaves and those slaves. But at the top of the end were scroll slaves, or, you know, the educated slaves that, by the way, who taught your children? Yeah, scroll slaves, right? You weren't hiring Socrates to teach your kids. And I've told you before, we had three different, we had the Lyceum. I don't know if I can see this. It's getting lighter and lighter. We had Lyceum, the Lyceum. You had the Schola, and you had the Gymnasium. The Gymnasium is where you went to learn and also to exercise, because the Greeks saw no difference between the two. The Lyceum is where you went to listen, and usually people try to keep their mouth shut. You read the Socratic dialogues, you know what I'm talking about, because Socrates made fun of, well, he would make you look like an idiot, because he used the Socratic method, but most, you know, there's a lot of irony in there, and if you don't catch it, you know, you're missing all the fun. But at the Lyceum, you could hear Socrates or Plato or Aristotle. But you remember, Plato was he was a scroll slave, right? And he eventually earned his freedom. So, in between these groups, and by the way, what did Socrates do for a living? This should tell you. He made statues. He was a philosopher part-time just for fun, but he made statues. So, you know, we don't have any statues that are remaining, so maybe he just did it, you know, whatever, as a side hobby, because he was mostly getting in trouble with his philosophy. But these were wealthy. In the middle of this, you had the merchants, all the middle class, merchants, prostitutes.
Soldier?
No, soldiers were up here. To be a soldier, the only soldiers could be members of the demi, and they would not let the average people. These are the citizens of Athens. These are free people, but the mercantile class. Sometimes there's overlap, but generally there's not huge overlap. You know, these are the folks that are selling you their, you know, stuff in the, you know, in the marketplace, right? Yes, sir.
The mercantile class of owned slaves?
Oh, yeah.
The wealthy?
Yeah, they all did. Yeah. What you got to realize, every culture until 1833 was a slave culture. Every culture. You know what happened in 1833, right? Britain outlawed slavery. Basically, they outlawed the importation of slavery, which then led to later on the getting rid of slavery in the British colonies, which was the world, basically, right? So when the British basically did that, Western civilization said slavery is no good. All types of slavery in the world pretty much died as a result of about 1833 because of the British Parliament. So all the world until that point was based in slave-based cultures. Now, today there's a lot of slave-based cultures. If you haven't, you know, traveled around the world, you can see some of that going on. But in this middle group, the middle class groups, you had a lot of, you know, there is overlap. I mean, there are overlap. There's, you know, but mostly it's the merchants here are the ones who own the businesses, so-called traders, businesses, whatever. You know, you got sailors. These guys are sailors and warriors, right? Remember, they had that in that class. So who's going to man your ships? It's not just all the demis, although they would, you know. I mean, you know what the world's like. It's interesting, though, that these are the only soldiers. So anyway, there's this dichotomy in the classes. So again, what's interesting is that this whole Greek worldview of stuff. So let's look at struggle against royalty. Oh, and by the way, there was a king in Athens at the time. He was elected. You say, how do you have an elected king? Well, that's an interesting question. We're not quite sure, but there was an Archelaus or something like that was his name. You can read about him. It's in my novel, The Second Mission, but I don't even try to explain it because I don't know how they did it either. But they actually had voted in a king, so an executive. Very interesting. Anyway, so Judges 4, I don't know how much we need to read this. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And this is one of those. Struggle against royalty, toiled equity, chanced upon the message of the gods of gospel, and fenced mouths of lions. So the Lord sold them in the hands of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Hazareth Hagioman. Because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. And Deborah, prophetess, the wife of Lapido, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah. And by the way, I never finished the thing. Rahab was the end one, right? Rahab was a prostitute, but that's not the point. The point was she was a free woman who was also was she Hebrew?
No,
She's a Gentile. So, and she's a woman. The point being, the most important point being, is because she's a woman, she's the peak of creation. And because she's a peak of creation, what's really interesting too is she's a Gentile and a free woman. In other words, she has an occupation. Although today we would say prostitution, we kind of look down on that, right? In that time they did not. As a matter of fact, when we looked at Ruth and Judges, do you remember what they used to do with their concubines? A concubine is a slave with conjugal rights. But in the Judges period, we know, and it says it over and over again, that many times the husbands of the concubines would put them out to be prostitutes to make a buck. And that was not seen as a negative at all in their culture. Our culture, we say that's not right. Christian culture, Christianity says this is not a right thing to do. But this is, look, these are the ancient world, right? Starvation cultures, you're trying to feed yourself. So, big deal. Yes, sir.
Are you talking about the Hebrew culture, or are you talking about the Gentile culture, essentially?
The Hebrew culture, but it's a reflection of all those cultures.
So it included the Hebrews, essentially.
Well, if you look back in Judges is almost significantly, and we're looking at Judges right now, it's significantly about the Hebrew culture within the context of the secular culture. But there's no pride to be had. Well, okay, there's pride to be had if you are from that culture. If you're from that culture, do you see a problem with it? It's normative within your culture, right? Today, if someone came down the street and said, "Here's my slave," we'd say. But if you're in Rome or Greece or Athens or Alexandria or wherever you are in that period, and someone's walking down the street and they have their slave, what do you think?
Everybody has one.
Yeah, everybody has one, right? The world has changed radically. And what's very interesting, I'll put it to you this, we wouldn't see a negative by it necessarily, but if you go back 150 years, and if you're walking down the street and and a gentleman has a butler, today you'd say, well, that's weird, right? But 150 years ago you'd say, well, everybody does, right? Everybody has a butler. Everybody has a maid. Everyone, some families had 10, 20, 30 people working for them in their homes, right? Downton Abbey. There you go, Downton Abbey. I mean, this was not unusual. That's why I always say, take off your cultural blinders, because if you want to see what this stuff means, you got to do that. You can't. You can judge them all day you want on this side, but if you want to understand what they're doing, You can't judge them except within the context of their own culture, right? That's the way it is. Yes, ma'am.
You know, my aunt and uncle were missionaries in Japan, and they had a houseboy, and they had servants. Now, maybe they paid them, not they weren't necessarily slaves, but the whole idea was that, you know, got jobs, there's jobs for people.
Well, yeah, and matter of fact, if any of you ever visit or go or are a military member going to, for example, Philippines, classic, of course, we don't have bases in Philippines anymore, but in Philippines, we had bases. Every single person went there had a houseboy and a maid to take, and usually a cook. And yeah, they paid them.
They came with the house.
A lot of times they came with a house,
And they
exactly.
rented that home. And they were part of the house.
They were part of the house, yeah, and many times they would live, sometimes they would live in the quarters, many times they wouldn't, especially for Americans. But, look, the world is different in different places, and cultures are different. Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
and why were all these women prostitutes? Probably most of them because the men in their family weren't able to protect them or had died or whatever. I mean, they didn't have social systems like we have.
Well, and it's not just social systems, although, remember, one of the things that the church, that we are called to do is protect widows and the children of widows, orphans, right? The reason is because in those cultures, unless you had a man, it's patriarchal, and everybody loves to say negative things, but a patriarchal society is great if you have somebody to protect you, right? If you have no one to protect you, you're toast. So, yeah, exactly. In these cultures, the only hope they had was that what's the right word? That protective element, right? And I've told you, remember, we haven't talked about it a long time since, I think, Ruth, but marriage is sex and sex is marriage. And when you see in the ancient world that women are left in the fields, that's an invitation. There's a reason for that, right? You had the normal marriage, the normal type of marriage. You had, I can't remember what, the abandoned marriage is over on the other end, and there was another type of marriage. There's like 3 types of marriage you see in the ancient world. But once you had sex, you were married. Unless you paid the prostitute. And by the way, if you go look in the law in the Torah, there it's given in there, it says that specifically. It gives you, it's called a bride tax, but it's what you pay the prostitute basically to not be obligated. So, you know, God's not saying this is okay and right and rectitude behavior, and that's where a lot of secular people get the wrong idea about God, right? What he does is God is working within the cultures we have to encourage us to the right place. This is total theological, okay? Talking a theological pool. But it's obvious that God is trying to get us to a point where we are more like him. That's theological, right? And so how do you do that? I can't just go and say, you're doing wrong, you're out of there, what am I going to do? Noah's Ark, right? You're dead. Does that work? No, he's dead. I can't do anything about that. I mean, God, I could, whatever. But we know the point, right? That God is trying to redeem us. So there's things we need to be redeemed from. It's just interesting how this, if you see how it's working within the cultures, I think it's amazing. So Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes settled. She sent for Barak and Abam, etc. I don't need to read the whole thing. The big deal about this is she was fighting royalty. Was she royalty? This is really important. Huh? Okay. Was there a king in Israel?
When the judges came before the kings,
Yeah.
so there was no royalty.
There was no royalty. There was no king in Israel. As a matter of fact, that's what got them in trouble, because they said, we don't have a king like everybody else has. We want a king. And so God gave him Saul. It's like, here's your punishment, right? So the point is that there is no royalty. That's what this thing is talking about. And what I think is very interesting is, okay, remember, rabbinic context. The minute the people heard, who through persuasion struggled against royalty, And the first illustration we have, allusion we have, direct allusion, is from Judges 4, and it's about Deborah. So we went from Rahab, the peak of creation, immediately to Deborah, who is a judge fighting royalty. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's really interesting. So 14. What's 14? In Judges 14:6. 14:6. I got to read it from the beginning. Samson went down to Timnah, and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. And his father and his mother replied, Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents didn't know this was for the Lord, who was now seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. For all that time, they were ruling over Israel. And Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyard of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, that he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. He went down and talked to the woman, and he liked her. And this didn't work out well for him at all, or the Philistines. By the way, just so you know, who are the Philistines?
They're the bad guys.
Yeah, but where'd they come from?
The sea.
The sea. Okay. Remember, the Israelites, the Hebrews, were a pillaging culture, but they were a land pillaging culture. The Philistines are interesting because they are a sea pillaging culture. There's another culture that's really similar to them called the Vikings. Yes! The Vikings are a sea pillaging culture. As people began to do boats, boats are a lot easier, and you couldn't do basically on horses. So with boats and ships, you could pillage. And so the Philistines were very interesting because they settled in the Levant. And they also settled in northern Africa. They settled in Egypt, but what happened to them in Egypt? Anybody know? They fought the ground forces until Pharaoh could figure it out, and basically Pharaoh wiped them off the map and sent them packing. So the Philistines were kicked out of Egypt, but that they had a stronghold in Egypt for a long time. But the Levant, they're really famous. The Levant, and they became what group? Did anyone know? No. The Philistines became the Carthaginians. Carthage. Carthage was really known for their sea stuff. The Romans had real problems with them on the seas, but instead Carthage really the Philistines really had this thing, they couldn't stop it. They were really pillagers. They also had another bad habit. They liked to sacrifice babies. You knew that, right?
Yeah, that's what offended the Romans so much when they got
That's why
this.
they salted their.
And where there were Tophets. Tophets are places of infant sacrifice. There's 2 known Tophets in the ancient world. There are probably more. The Egyptians probably salted the earth with one in around 1000, I think it was 1000 BC, when they kicked them out. But there are 2 Tophets we know of. One in Carthage and the other one in Jerusalem. The reason the one was in Jerusalem was because of the Philistines. So the Philistines are especially bad. And by the way, Samson fits 2 of the criteria, right? 2 of the criteria. Number 1 was struggled against royalty and fenced lion's mouths. Okay? There's 2. Isn't this interesting, though? Okay? We go from Rahab to Deborah to Samson. And not just Samson, but the reference is to Samson's Philistine girlfriend. Through the Philistine girlfriend, Samson was able to wipe out a lot of Philistines. But eventually, she got given to his best man, which is also an interesting situation. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Also, the minute you talk about Samson, you think about Delilah, who was a concubine let for prostitution by her husband, who was Samson's squeeze, and also caused his destruction and the destruction of Philistines. This is very interesting stuff. Let's go to the next one. The next one is 1 Samuel 12. 1 Samuel 12. Okay, Samuel said to all of Israel, I have listened to everything you said to me and have set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I have been your leader from my youth until this day. Here I stand, testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? From whose hand have I accepted a bribe, or make me shut my eyes? If I have done any of these, I will make it right. And they said, you have not cheated or oppressed us, they replied. You have not taken anything from anyone's hand. Samuel said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and also his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. He is a witness, they said. And Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron to bring and brought your forefathers up out of Egypt. Now then, stand here, because I'm going to confront you with evidence before the Lord, and as to all the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your fathers. Okay, what criteria does he fit in? Who through persuasion, struggle against royal, toiled equity. In other words, diakosune, righteousness. Samuel is toiling equity. He did it by confronting the people with the righteous acts of God. And by the way, with his, you notice how the Greeks would love this. He says beautiful stuff in Greek thought. He says, okay, he didn't say, I've done good. I've helped the poor. I've been a priest for you. I've been a good judge for you. That's not what he said. He said, whose ox have I taken? Testify against me. He says, testify against me. Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? Have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I've done any of these, I will make it right. The point of the whole thing is, this is Greek righteousness, right? It's not just what you do and what you don't do. It's the balance of those. And I think, if you want to take this as a Greek statement of righteousness, right? That you didn't do those things which, by the way, some of these are obviously illegal under the law. Okay, taking a donkey, taking an ox, that's stealing, right? Cheating is not necessarily purely illegal, or oppression. It's not really illegal to oppress people, right? Especially if you're a judge or a priest. A bribe. That's getting iffy, right? The Greeks would say he's diakosune. He's standing up because he's not doing, whatever he achieved in his life, he's not to the excesses. He's not doing the wrong things. He is doing the right things, and he's doing it in a balance of whatever. Not balancing right and wrong is not karma. It's just that he is a balanced life, right? Because we know that he's a judge. We know that he's a priest. You expect goodness from him, right? But has he done anything else? And that's what he was asking. That he is toiling for equity. Okay. Now the next one is 1734. 1734. And also it's pretty interesting because he was putting in a king. Let's see, the beginning of this is, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled in Shokoth in Judah. They had pitched a camp at Ephraim Dammim between Sokoth and Aziek. And Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped at the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. So we go down to let's see, where's a good place to start? 26. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine?" It's Goliath, right? "And removes this disgrace from Israel. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated him that they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." And then 34. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned to me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord will be with you." Now, obviously, the reason, okay, if you look at our list, okay, through the persuasion, struggled against royalty, told equity, chanced upon the gospel, and fenced lions' mouths. Okay, people who have this memorized, they have the Septuagint memorized. Every place that it talks about lion, right, they're going to be there. And every place that it talks about someone striving for equity, now that's a little more difficult, but you notice what David is striving against. Who's the royalty? It ain't the Philistines. It's old Saul, right? And eventually David overcomes Saul. Very, very interesting the way that this kind of fits together. Okay, how about,
Sort of.
what's that?
I said, sort of, and yet you
Yeah.
always have respect for Saul.
He did.
Because Saul was also anointed by the Lord.
He did, and you notice what it says. We could read the whole of the accounts of David, right? This obviously points us within a rabbinic context. But where else does this fit? Toiled equity. As a matter of fact, David continually toiled for equity, but what did he always do? He failed a lot. He never achieved. Really, he was not diakosune. Because Bathsheba, for example, Uriah, he did things that did not please God. And who was it Samuel? Nathan. Nathan told him all the time, hey, stop it, right? And he wouldn't listen. David's not a perfect guy, but yet God said he's a man after my own heart. Very interesting. Let's see. 2 Samuel 5. 2 Samuel chapter 5. We know what happened to the Philistines. The Philistines are big time. When the Philistines are 17, when the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out over the valley of Rimmon, and so David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" And the Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely hand the Philistines over to you." So David went to Baal Perazim and there defeated them. He said, "The waters break out. The Lord has broken out against my enemies before me." So the place was called Baal Perazim. And that's basically Baal is God Perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. Once more the Philistines came up and spread out to the valley of Requim. So David required of the Lord, and he answered, "Do not go straight up, but circle around behind them and attack them in front of the balsam trees." As soon as you heard the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, move quickly, because that will mean the Lord has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army. So David did as the Lord commanded him, and he struck down the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. That doesn't fit as well in our categories, but the point was that David, in toiling for equity, right, fits within that context. 7:11. 2 Samuel 7:11. Let's see. 10, and I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did in the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you a rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and the rest of your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I'll be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men and flogging inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. And King David went in and sat down before the Lord, and he said, Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? The thing I want to note is, look at the Greek at this statement. This is so Greek, it is astounding. It says, Who am I, O sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And by the way, I think our time is up. I didn't hear the bell. So, need to ring the bell. We'll continue with this. Remember, in Greek, it's always concrete, it's always literal, it's always pointing to something else, and it's not just whatever, made up, stuff. Thank you, Father, for your word. Pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.